So here's your chair, here's your stand, and this is your stage. This could be the high school all-state audition, it could be an audition from one of the top conservatories in the country, or it could be the principal French horn of the New York Philharmonic. So what's going through your head? What's going through your brain? Are you thinking, oh, I wish I'd practiced that more? Or maybe, I've got to pee, I need to get off the stage. Or are you thinking, ooh, there was a really cute guy outside that was auditioning right after me. Maybe I could talk to him on the way out. Or are you thinking, ooh, I really wish I hadn't eaten that whole pizza for lunch. And so what you're starting to feel are the mental and physical symptoms of adrenaline rushing into your system. And what we're going to talk about today are how do you control all those variables, all the mental and the physical symptoms that affect you once you start to have adrenaline rush into your body. My background is a little bit different than the average French horn player in that I played college tennis at a pretty high level. And when I first started playing professionally and also towards the end of my college career, I started to correlate the two and figure out that musicians and athletes are actually a lot alike. And I really believe that musicians are athletes. We use a lot finer muscles and motor skills, but what we're doing is basically the same thing that any professional athlete does. We perform just as often, we train just as hard, just as many hours every single day. We sadly don't get to have an entourage of people that travel with us like the professional sports teams. You know, we don't have massage therapists on call. And so what the difference between most athletes and most musicians is athletes generally take better care of themselves. And they've also learned, the ones particularly at the highest level, they've learned how to get into the zone quicker and more consistently. And so that's what we're going to look at today, is how to deal with all these physical and mental symptoms, variables, and how to use them to get yourself into the zone. So we're going to start by defining what is being in the zone. And for me, I can describe it as the whole world goes into slow motion. I remember back when I was in high school playing tennis, and there was one match I played where it literally just like I would go to hit the ball, and the ball was coming across, you know, in real time, and I would go to hit it, and literally everything would go into slow motion, slow motion, slow motion, until the point where I made contact with the ball, and then it was back in real time. And then the ball would come back across the net, I'd go to hit it again, slow motion, slow motion, slow motion, hit the ball real time again. And literally the entire match, the entire hour and 15 minutes was just like that. And I've never, until that point, I had never experienced anything like that. And then when I was at USC doing my doctorate, we had a big audition, opening day of, I think, the first year of my doctorate. We had to audition on Ein Heldenleben. And we were given the exercise for the audition that they could choose any measure from the entire piece. So the summer before, I just really wanted to do well, and I studied and studied not only the French horn part, but the score, and I knew it inside and out. And I was at the Aspen Music Festival in school that summer, and I started to go to a meditation class at Aspen, and I started to meditate and visualize, and I started to realize that everything was focused on that audition. And I got to the audition. I was, I think, the last person to go, walked in, sat down, and again, it happened. Everything went into complete slow motion. And I finished the audition, and I was like, wow, that went really well. And the whole studio class looked at me with their mouth on the floor, and they were like, that was the best we've ever heard you play. And so at that moment, and I ended up winning the audition, but at that moment, I knew that I could also experience the same zone feeling in music as well. So that's what it feels like. And if you talk to most professional athletes or professional musicians, they also have had, the same experience. So from here, how do we get in the zone? How do you do it? And when I teach, one of the things I talk to a lot of my students about, especially when they're taking auditions, college auditions, high school auditions, is how to minimize the physical, mental, and emotional variables. And to me, that's a big word, variables. Because there's certain things when you take an audition that you can control, and there's certain things that you really can't control. And so it's how do you approach both the items you can control and the items you can't control. And one of the things I always recommend to everybody is that routines are good. And I don't not just your warm-up routine, but a routine going into the audition. And again, if you talk to the professional athletes and musicians out there, you know that the ones that have great careers, the ones that have won the big auditions, they usually have some kind of routine leading up to it, either the week before, the day of, in the moment of the audition. They've created something like that. So from here, I want to start by giving you a little bit of background. What is happening in your body as you start to get nervous? And if you look at this picture, when you're put in a stressful situation, basically your adrenal glands start to produce adrenaline. That adrenaline starts to run around in your body and attach to receptors known as beta receptors. And these beta receptors are actually found all throughout your body. You have them in your brain, you have them in your lungs, you have them, women have them in their uterus, you have them, all over your body. So the adrenaline's running around and attaching to these receptors. What we feel is this fight or flight syndrome. And I'm sure you've all heard of this described before, but this is caused by the adrenaline. And you always have the choice. You have the choice either to say, I'm done, let's go home, and kind of give up in the process. Or you have the choice to say, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to stand up, I'm going to take this audition, and it's going to go well, and you're thinking positively. So you always have this option. And so in our world, when this is basically what it feels like, right? When you're at the audition and you're in the moment, it can feel like this. And one of the biggest things you have to realize is the body is one unit. And so we're now going to go through and talk about physical symptoms and mental symptoms that you feel as this adrenaline is now running into your system, and how to control these symptoms so that you're getting closer and closer to your peak performance, to playing in the zone. And so just in the back of your mind, remember that the body is one unit, meaning that physical symptoms and mental symptoms can affect each other. So different physical symptoms you get are increased heart rate, and a way you can control this is by learning to calm yourself down. And remember that some of the beta receptors are actually located in your heart. Another symptom you might get is dry mouth. How many of you guys have ever had dry mouth before? I know I've personally experienced it, and it's one of the most uncomfortable things, and it makes you, when you get this physical symptom, it starts to make the mental symptoms happen. Like, what am I going to do about this dry mouth? I can't play. And so you have to learn how to get to the root of the problem for that ahead of time. And I relate dry mouth to the athletic world in that dry mouth is the musician's form of cramping. So when an athlete goes into performance, they're usually concerned with two things. They're concerned with making sure they have enough potassium, enough electrolytes in their system, and they're also concerned with being hydrated. And I know when I was performing, one of the things, or playing tennis, that I would always try to make sure I was really hydrated. And I had a coach tell me one time in high school, they said, make sure that your urine is clear the day of your match. And so for me, what that meant was going 48 hours out from the match and saying, okay, I'm going to start hydrating now. Or even 72 hours out, I'm going to start hydrating now, because hydration is not something that you sadly can cram for, right? And so I would start hydrating, 72 hours out, start taking more water, and then from there, by the time I would actually reach the performance, I would then be hydrated. And so one of the problems with people with dry mouth is that they're usually not hydrated well enough in advance of the performance. So always double check it. I know it's gross, but you could always check and see if your urine's clear. If you're taking supplements, sometimes that will affect the color, but just make sure it is clear. Another thing I should mention while we're on dry mouth is some people get the opposite of that, which is actually called wet mouth. And that's where their salivary glands are overproductive. And one of the things I've found to help students and colleagues deal with this is actually eating ginger. Ginger calms the glands, and so eating ginger is something that will help with that. You can drink ginger tea. Some people actually will put ginger in there, just like eat ginger pieces like you'd find at a sushi restaurant. So these are things you can add to your diet if you get wet mouth. Another physical symptom is body shaking, tone quaver. And I know when I was growing up, at least in middle school and early high school, I would actually get it so that it felt like my mouth was shaking when I would play. And again, that's just learning how to calm yourself down. And one of the things we're going to address down the road in this lecture is meditation, how to meditate, and how to calm yourself down. And that will definitely directly help with this problem. Another one is shallow breathing. For all the brass players out there, and myself being a French horn player, one of the things that we have the hardest time with is when we're on stage, we start to breathe not as deeply as we're used to in the practice room. And so one of the things I tell my students to focus on is really just picking a point at the back of the wall where you just inhale and breathe to that point. And so you're consciously reminding yourself of a point sitting at the back of the wall, and that will help you just make sure that you're always inhaling and exhaling at your peak potential. And another one is butterflies in your stomach. For the longest time, I thought that, this is just some random feeling you get, and it's actually not really correlated to the adrenaline, but the scientific reason that that is happening to some people is that when you get nervous, the blood leaves your system and goes to the muscle groups in your body. And so that is what is actually happening. And again, if you have this problem and it really affects you when you play, just learning the meditation that we'll talk about later will help you a lot with this issue. Also acid reflux, that's another symptom some people get. And that is actually the body, when you eat, produces gastric acid. And sometimes acid reflux, or most of the time, is caused by excess gastric acid in your system. So one of the things that you definitely would not want to do if you're someone that experiences acid reflux, whenever you're taking an audition or have a performance, you would want to make sure that you eat things that are high in fiber, or drink a glass of milk. Those are some things that will calm your system down and help reduce the amount of gastric acid that's in your system. And finally, sweating. Everybody has, I'm sure, experienced this at some point whenever you're performing. And athletes experience it all the time. It's just something we have to deal with. And so it's a side effect of, the adrenaline in your system. So what I would recommend for that, particularly for the French horn players, is keep a cloth with you on your, keep a cloth on your leg, help you wipe down your palms. Some people get a lot of sweat around your mouth, and if you're someone that actually plays with a dry embouchure, that will really affect you. So, I've had friends that experience this, and they just always keep the cloth nearby so that it helps them alleviate the sweating. So back in 2008, I took a survey of over 500 professional musicians, and I asked them, what are, of these symptoms, what are you experiencing the most? And if you look at this chart here, you can see that increased heart rate is the number one thing people experienced, followed by dry mouth. And I have to say that I did survey more brass players than I did string players. And then from there on down, you can see what was listed. But I thought this was interesting just to see what my other colleagues and friends were experiencing when they would play as well. We went through all the physical symptoms that you get, and some of these physical symptoms can really be affected by the food that you eat. And so we're going to now discuss what to eat and what not to eat. We've already gone through water and how important hydration is in this whole process. Also, another thing that I've found out over the years is eating right for your blood type. I personally get affected by not having enough fat, enough protein in my diet, and it's all directly related to my blood type. And so a book that I found that is great is called The Zone, and it goes through kind of what you should eat and what you should not eat depending on your blood type, and you can also do more research based on this. There's tons of stuff on the internet about that. And so if you're someone that really does get affected by sugars or proteins, fats, you might want to look into this because it might be an answer to part of your journey. Also, we talked about excess gastric acid in your system, so making sure that at that point you're eating things with lots of fiber, bran muffins. The milk also could help with that. And the last thing is potassium. Now this is a big piece of it. I don't know if you've ever heard, eat a banana before you play. Well, there's a reason behind that, and the banana has lots of potassium in it. What happens when that adrenaline, if you go back to the original picture we showed, the adrenaline is running around in your system, and it's attaching to beta receptors. And what potassium does is it slows down that process of the adrenaline attaching to the beta receptors. And so what I've found with myself and my students is eating a banana before I play is actually a really great thing. And some people also have found that they need 2 bananas before they play, so you might want to experiment with that. Or you can look at other foods that have lots of potassium, cantaloupe, potatoes, and again, you can Google these things and figure out what foods you could add to your diet that you like that have potassium for the day of the performance. Now, foods not to eat, salt. Salt is a dehydrant. It basically goes into your system and takes the water that you've just hydrated yourself with out of your, absorbs it, it takes it out of your system. So things that have lots of salt, canned foods, processed foods, fast food, all those things you want to stay away from, particularly leading up to your audition. Alcohol, particularly if you're under the age of 21, I recommend staying away from that. But alcohol, it also is a dehydrant, and you just don't want to have that in your system the day of an audition. And caffeine. So caffeine also is another dehydrant, diuretic, and what it does is it actually speeds up your system. So if you're someone that is already experiencing increased heart rate, the last thing you want to do is now go into your body and add more caffeine to it that will now increase the system even more. Acidic foods, another big piece of the puzzle. So if you, again, have too much gastric acid, the last thing you want to do is add more acid to your system. Items with acidic foods are tomatoes, citrus, all those foods I would stay far away from, again, like 48 hours before your audition, just to make sure that you're not adding more to the root of the problem. So we've kind of covered all the bits and pieces of the physical side, but just remember that your body is one unit. So some of those physical things could cause you to have more mental reactions and vice versa. So just remember that through this whole process. And we're now going to move into the mental side. So I found this slide online, and I think it's a great example of what's going on in the brain. There's the left brain side, and then there's the right brain side. And the left brain, if you look at this photo, it goes through, you can tell the people are hard at work. They're sitting in the cubicle, working really hard, analyzing. And if you look at the right side of the brain, it's more the party brain, the fun brain. And if we were to break each side of the brain down and talk about what's happening, in the left side, that's where you get your inner voices, your irrational thoughts, your self-criticism, and your analysis. If we were to break the right side of the brain down, you would see like mental images, home movies, sounds, and feelings. And I always tell my students to try to figure out which of the two that you live in. And most people live in one side of the brain more than the other. And I know for myself, I'm an extremely left brain person. That means when I'm on stage, I'm actually hearing a lot of voices and inner thoughts in my head, mostly negative, that you don't really want when you're on stage. But it's a great side of your brain to be in the practice room because you're analyzing kind of what's going on. And over the years, I've learned to cope with all these inner voices that I hear in my head. And for a long time, I didn't really even understand what was going on. I just knew I heard a lot of thoughts, and I thought everybody heard that. But some people don't, particularly the right brain people. And so what I've learned to do over the years is, I had a teacher tell me one time, they said, why don't you call the name something and kind of send it away when you're getting ready to play? And I said, okay. I thought, well, this is weird, but I said I'd try it. And so I named the voice in my head Gertrude. And I said, hey, Gertrude, listen, when I'm on stage, you're going to live outside that door. And you can talk all you want, but I'm not going to hear you. And when I'm done, I will come pick you up, and we'll go on with our daily life. And you can come back and be with me when I practice. And so now when I'm on stage and the voice creeps in my head, I'm like, yo, Gertrude, you're not supposed to be here. You stay outside the door. And for me, that has really been the answer to a lot of my problems. Other people deal with the voice in their head in different ways. I've read books where they'll draw like a ring of fire around themselves and no voice can get past that ring of fire. Or some people I've heard have zipped themselves up in an egg and somehow the voice never gets past the egg. And so whatever works for you is a great solution to this. But I know for me that's been a huge answer to my mental preparation. If we talk about the people that are right brain people, their biggest problem is they daydream. And so it's like I said before, when they're on stage, they have a thought, a feeling, and it starts to spiral into other things. And so for the most part, they're able to access feelings pretty well when they're on stage, but they might want to lean a little bit more towards the middle between the left and the right brain. And so they have to do more work for when they're in the practice room, to not let their hour and a half or their 45 minutes that they need to be in the practice room spiral into just, them sitting there and daydreaming the whole time. So that's kind of what we're going to delve into, are different things that you can now use to help you learn a little bit better to be in different sides of the brain. First thing I'm going to talk about is adequate preparation. Now, how many of you have shown up at an audition at a concert and just thought in the back of your mind, man, I really, really wish that I had put more time into this piece or into preparing this audition? I know I've done that. And there's a lot of different things that we can use, but the first of which is practice goals. And by practice goals, I mean breaking it down into immediate goals, kind of like a 21-day plan, really long-term goals, and even as far out as your dream. And I recommend to my students, one of the first questions I always ask them on the very first lesson that we have is, what's the dream? And therefore, once you know the dream, you can then back it up and build on that dream, figuring out what are some longer-term goals for you. Maybe your dream is to be the principal French horn in the New York Philharmonic. Well, a long-term goal might be to learn a concerto from memory. And then a 21-day goal might be to break that concerto down and say, I'm going to memorize the first page. And then immediate goals are things you can do today that will help you with that. And so just adequate preparation for the dream, and it could be as simple as, I want to play this upcoming concert well. You can break everything down into different parts and help with your preparation. Another thing when you're preparing is making sure that you're checking in always on the technical, how all that's going. Are you playing your scales? The musical, which is, how are you playing your phrases? And the psyche, what's going on in your brain? Are you living too much in your left? Are you living too much in your right as you're preparing? Another thing I have a lot of my students do is keep a practice journal. And this, I feel like, is a really great tool for those people who, a week goes by and your teacher says, well, how much did you practice? And they're like, well, I don't know. So a practice journal will help you with that. Or for those people who feel like they've actually practiced more than they have. I have many students like that will come in and tell me, that they put in X number of hours this week, and I'm looking at them and thinking to myself, it doesn't sound like you did. And so I have those students keep a practice journal, and then when you look back at that journal, it really tells you kind of what's happened. And it's like the people that, they go on the diet and they keep a log of everything they've eaten. It really keeps you true to exactly what's going on in your daily life. The next thing is routine, smart practice, and what I also put by this is AKA slow practice. And I can't tell you how many times I've had all my teachers say to me, you need to work through that passage slower. And so just know that your body has a lot of muscle memory, and anytime you're working on something that's extremely technical, one of the things that might happen is that you haven't mapped it in your system slow enough. So when you get on stage, you now can't perform it at the level you want because 90% of the times you've practiced it have been incorrect or have not been at a good level, and therefore on stage you're not going to somehow magically have this happen perfectly like you're hoping for it to be. So practice slowly. That means use the metronome, turn it down, and gradually turn it up. And the last thing is play for people. Create the situation where you start to feel the nerves, maybe some other physical symptoms happen, but play for people. That means schedule lessons for yourself. If you're out of school taking auditions, create mock auditions for yourself. One of the things I always try to do if I'm taking an audition is look at the day the audition is going to happen and then scale back from that and say, okay, the 2 weeks leading up to it, I'm going to play for X, Y, and Z people. And then, the week before that, I'm going to take lessons with these people. And so, create situations where you can try to feel what it is close to what it will feel like to be on stage for the actual performance or the audition. Before we move on to the next slide, I actually want to mention a few things that I've learned over the years from people as far as routines go. And if you remember back to the beginning of this presentation, I had said that one of the things that will help you get into the zone is coming up with a routine. And over the years, I've gotten to observe a lot of fantastic master classes with different, great French horn players. And if you look at all the great professionals, they each have their own system, their own way of getting into an audition, to get into a concert. I remember hearing a master class with Jen Monto, now the current principal of the Philadelphia Orchestra, And she has a routine where when she goes into the audition, she comes up with adjectives for every excerpt. And she knows exactly what she's going to think about between each excerpt. And she also knows, I mean, she's got it almost down to a science where it's a routine for her. So when she's on stage, all the other variables that are coming at her aren't so much in the equation because she knows exactly what she's going to think about and do. I also observed a master class of Julie Landsman, and she talks a lot about, she has a 10 toes type of exercise she does where she makes sure she's really grounded before she starts. And she also is very much into mindful meditation to help her kind of relax. And also Jeff Nelson, he has his whole magic line theory, and he talks about the walk, where the difference between the practice, what you do in the practice room and what you do on the stage, the only difference is the walk. And so he talks about what is important to think about, do during that walk to the stage. So all the great teachers and players, they have their own routines, their own systems. So that's why routine is such an important part of not only your daily life, but also your adequate preparation. So the next thing we're going to talk about is sleep, and how sleep is such a huge piece of preparation for your audition or your concert. If you are one of those people that has problems with your left brain, you hear too many voices, one of the things you want to make sure of is that you actually get enough sleep, because lack of sleep will increase the amount of voices you hear in your left brain. Another thing that I always have students and colleagues ask me is, well, how much sleep do I actually need? How do I know how much sleep I need? And as you go through the night, you go through different sleep patterns. Sometimes you're in light sleep, sometimes you're in deep sleep. And so one of the things you want to start to learn how to do is kind of understand what you feel like when you wake up. Do you feel really groggy? Do you feel really energized? And that's kind of how you can start to determine, on average, how much sleep do you need a night. And there's all kinds of studies written on it on the internet. You can look into it more or read about. But it's a little bit of trial and error. I know for myself that I need about 8.5 hours of sleep, 9 hours of sleep a night, and I'm feeling really good. If I get too much, then it affects me usually for a couple of days. One thing I've also learned from my colleagues is to take naps before your shows or naps before your audition. You know, if you've got a really long day of auditioning, if you have to start at 8 a.m. and maybe the audition is not over till 10 or 11 p.m., you probably should sneak a nap in there at some point. And the other thing you have to check on is how long should your nap be? Some people can sleep for an hour and a half and feel fantastic. Those other people will sleep for an hour and a half and feel terrible. So maybe they only need 20 minutes of sleep or 30 minutes of a nap. And so you kind of also have to play around with that. One of the coolest things that I've found, and this might really help you in this process of figuring out how much sleep do I need, is I've found there's an app. There are a bunch of apps actually out there, but probably the most popular app, it has, as of this moment, 5 stars and over 4,300 reviews. It's called the Sleep Cycle app. And what it does is you put it on your bed underneath your pillow, and it actually monitors the light and heavy sleep cycles that you go through in the night, and it will wake you up around the time you want to get up when you're in the lightest sleep cycle possible. It basically measures your movement on the bed, and then will wake you up at the point when you're at the lightest phase of your sleep cycle. So it's pretty cool. And once you kind of, really figure out the amount of sleep you need, it will help you not only in your auditioning and performance life, but probably in the rest of your life as well. So exercise, that's another big piece of the puzzle when we're kind of looking at your daily routine and how you can help yourself kind of clear your mind and be the best you can be leading up to an audition or a concert. And exercise is really important. I mean, think about musicians. How many hours a day do we sit in a white-walled practice room and, we don't move out of that position, and you're there for many, many, many minutes at a time. So exercise will get you out of the practice room, get some vitamin D, be in the sun. It also gets you moving. And one of the things that's really important as a human is that you move, because when you move, your body creates lubricant for your joints. Also, your brain, what happens when you exercise is that your brain starts to create more stem cells. So, everything is helpful when you exercise. So I would recommend that if, you don't do, if you're not into like running or biking, maybe try yoga. It's anything where you just get out and move is helpful for when you're preparing for these auditions and concerts. So meditation is the next big piece we're going to talk about. Meditation or centering, depending on what you want to call it. And for me, I can tell you that it's really helped me learn how to deal with the physical variables and the mental variables that happen or caused by the adrenaline in my system. And so there are thousands of ways to meditate. You can look up online, you can read in books, you can, there's different YouTube videos about it. But what I've learned over time are there's some basic rules that kind of exist no matter which meditation you're doing, and that will help you kind of learn to get yourself in a centered place. One of my favorite stories is that I have a friend of mine who was on the professional tennis tour, and he used to meditate 1 hour every day, which I just find amazing. And he was also one of the most mentally strong people on the tennis court that I've ever seen. And so he would bring out his little stool in the morning, and he'd sit on it, and he would clear his mind, and he would just work on clearing his mind for the whole hour. And then he'd get up and go about his day. And I've learned personally that the more you do this, the easier it gets. And it's just like practicing your instrument. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So the basic goals of meditation are that your focal point is no higher than your eye level. If you've ever kind of seen someone try to play for memory when they're performing, you see that their eyes kind of go up into the left. And what that means is that they're accessing their left brain. And so the same thing happens when you meditate. You want to pick a focal point, just draw a line or find a horizontal line out in front of you, and you want to keep your eyes below that focal point, so no higher than that focal point. The next kind of rule of meditation is if your mind leaves while you're meditating, if it goes somewhere else, if it starts to hear voices or if it starts to see mental images, gently bring it back to that place, of what you're meditating on. And so don't freak out, just allow it to kind of come back and then leave it there. And if it wanders again, just bring it back. And over time, the wandering will happen less and the ability to stay in the moment will happen more. And then the final thing is it takes practice. And I can tell you, when I've been doing the most meditation, I can recall it just instantly. I can just think about what it feels like to meditate, and then it just calms my whole system down. So just know it takes practice. And I would, if you really want to incorporate this into your routine for your auditions or your concerts, I would make sure that you do it, every day, at least for a month leading up to the audition or the concert consistently, and that will help you with it. So we're going to walk through today 4 different types of meditation. But I'm going to recommend to everybody that you get an item such as a kitchen timer, or if you use your smartphone, there are countdown timers on the phone, but something that will beep so that you know you're done. And the reason for that is when you're meditating, one of the things that happens is you start to wonder, how long have I been here? How much longer do I have? And so you want to make sure that as you're going through the meditation, you're not constantly thinking about that. So it's a great tool to have. So the 4 types of meditation we're going to walk through, and again, there's thousands of types of meditation, but these are 4 that I've found have worked really well for me and for my students. What you do when you're starting out, if you're new to meditation altogether, I recommend just starting out with a minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes, no more really than 5 minutes, and trying to incorporate that into your daily life. And what you'll notice is maybe the first couple of days it's very difficult to keep your mind in one place, but then after time it will get easier and easier and easier. So set the timer and really kind of take yourself to a calm place, just kind of clear your mind of everything. And the first one we're going to talk about is breathing. So what you do is you just blow air in deeply, blow air out, and particularly for the wind players, kind of feel what it feels like, when you're playing into your instrument, so that you help yourself recall all the air that you need when you play. The other half of it is that you want to make sure that you're feeling the air go into your entire body. I even like to think about it going all the way to my toes and then really exhaling so the air goes all the way out. And that's all you focus on for the minute. So that's the first type of meditation. So the next type of meditation is actually called positive visualization. And that one is used a lot in the sports world. I can tell you that I got redshirted a year when I was in college playing tennis, and I did a lot of this when I was at home during the redshirt year. And I would sit down, and basically when you do a positive visualization, you start from beginning to end, and you see everything happen in real time, so it takes a while to do this one. But everything has to be basically perfect, positive. And so I would play a tennis match in my brain, and I would think through it and have every point, I would win every point. In the very beginning, it was actually hard to win every point, but as I did it, day in and day out, I would learn to get quicker at positively visualizing the tennis match. And so for us as musicians, you could think through your audition. I mean, you know what the rep is for the audition, and you can picture a stage, you can picture your chair and your stand. And so what you do is you picture the walk out onto the stage, you picture that the whole event is taking place, everything is going exactly like you want it, you're hearing yourself play like you want, and then basically you picture yourself walk off the stage. And so the whole visualization happens in real time. And so that one is one that I've found for students, particularly students that think lots of negative thoughts. This is a really great thing to see happen. Or maybe there's just maybe you have a concert coming up and there's just a solo, and you keep, when you're kind of by yourself, you often see yourself maybe messing up that solo. This is something that you want to do. And so the brain is a very, very fascinating thing, and you can really map positive images into it without ever touching your instrument. And it's like I said, I use this in the sports world, and there's so many famous stories of Olympic athletes getting injured leading up to the Olympics, and all they can do is positively visualize their event, and they do it 100 times in their head perfectly, and maybe their competitor does it on, maybe they're a diver and they do it on the springboard, and let's say they don't hit every dive perfectly, and so the person that has done the visualization actually has a greater chance of doing it right than the person that's done it in real life, in real time. So this is definitely a really helpful tool that we can kind of steal as musicians from the sports world. The third meditation that we're going to talk about is meditating on a feeling. And I've found that this is actually a really great tool for those right brain people who start to kind of see a picture and then it spirals into other pictures, particularly because meditating on a feeling sometimes for them is hard because then it relates to different events in their life. And so when you meditate on a feeling, again, you just kind of bring yourself to a calm state, and then you find a feeling, maybe it's the feeling that you have associated with a certain piece of music you have to play. And so you kind of take yourself to that moment, or you might meditate on a feeling of something in your life that you really like. It should be a positive feeling, unless you're meditating on a feeling that maybe of a piece that's really dark and you need to stay in that feeling for the whole piece. So I always recommend to people that are just starting out with this one to maybe pick something in your life, like something that you like to do, or some feeling that you got when you did something great. For me, if I try this one, I always meditate on the feeling when I did the LA Marathon, what it felt like to finally cross that finish line, and I was like, oh, thank goodness. So that feeling was such a huge feeling for me that I use that a lot if I try this meditation. And finally, the last meditation is clearing your mind. And this one is, so you, again, take yourself to a quiet place, and then what you do is you try to cancel out any thoughts that come into your brain. If they come in, you just kind of push them aside and you let them happen, but you push them aside. And on top of that, if it helps, you can kind of think about just like a black space or maybe a horizontal line, and everything is clear around it. So that's another one. And when you're kind of going through these meditations, let's say you want to try to find the one that's best for you, I would recommend trying all 4 of them, and then doing the same amount of time on each, and see which one's easiest for you and which one's hardest for you. And over time, you might want to use different ones to kind of help you elongate your mental capacity, to stay in one place. And I think these are really valuable tools. And again, just remember, it takes practice. So it's not going to be perfect today. It might take you time to get to a place where you really feel comfortable. But the bottom line is, if you do them, you can recall them instantly when you walk on stage, or if you get nervous or start to feel some of these physical or mental symptoms we've talked about today. So one of my favorite things to talk about is a courage log. And a courage log is a list of events in your life that you either are going to do or have occurred that kind of take you out of your comfort zone. And for me, I'm always trying to add to my courage log, because what that does when I walk on stage or into an audition, I can always say that event was much more difficult to do than performing this particular concert or this particular audition. And to describe to you what's in my courage log, The top picture refers to the LA Marathon. I ran it a few years ago, and just to do the training it takes and to go through the actual event and run 26.2 miles and encounter all the mental traps that you go through in the runner's block and the pain that you feel in your body, not only the day of, but the days after it as well. Those type of things for me, that was a big milestone in my life. And so I definitely include that one in the courage log. The picture of my mom and myself was at a point in her life where she had a benign meningioma, which is a brain tumor. And for me to watch her, particularly as an only child, go through the doors leading to her surgery was just one of the hardest experiences of my life. And so I always will tell myself, walking on stage to play a concert or take an audition is not anywhere as difficult as knowing that I might never see her again. The last picture is a picture of something my father and I did. He went through a period of his life where he wanted to do things such as whitewater kayaking and base jumping, and so he and I went base jumping, and as we were going off the mountain, I remember thinking to myself, there's no concert that could potentially be as scary as what I am feeling at this moment. And so what I'm always trying to do with my own life is add things to my courage log that I know will take me out of my comfort zone, so that when I'm out of my comfort zone in a performance situation, it doesn't feel nearly as difficult as some of these other events. So I always find that one of the elephants in the room is talking about beta blockers. It's something that a lot of people don't talk about, and I think it's something that people should talk about. But if we go back to the original explanation of what happens in your system when you feel stressed or get stressed, is the adrenal glands produce adrenaline. Adrenaline is running around your body, and it attaches to different receptors, beta receptors in your system. And what beta blockers do is they jump in the place of the adrenaline attaching to the receptor. So the beta blocker basically gets in before the adrenaline attaches, and it attaches, and therefore you feel less stressed. You might, for people that take beta blockers, they actually feel that their symptoms are more, especially the physical symptoms, are more minimal. And so a couple things just to know about beta blockers is to consult your doctor first. I can't emphasize that enough. I've had friends that have taken beta blockers that shouldn't, and they get really terrible side effects. And for myself personally, I have extremely low blood pressure, and so I actually have never been able to take them. But it's something that if I had tried to take them and I hadn't known this about myself first, that I could have ended up in the hospital, after having taken them. So consult your doctor first. The next thing is that the actual name for beta blockers is Inderal. Some people don't know that, and that's the name of the drug that you get if you take beta blockers. And also, again, don't use them if you have certain problems such as low blood pressure, diabetes, or asthma. Those are certain things that most doctors won't prescribe them to you if you have that. And there's different. When you get the beta blocker pill, a lot of people find that they take different amounts of it. So just make sure that's another thing you want to talk to your doctor about. You don't want to take too much, and then you'll feel loopy or whatnot on the stage. When I did this survey back in 2008, one of the questions I asked was, is it fair for musicians to use beta blockers in auditions? I just thought this was an interesting question, because if you look at the sports world, at least looking at beta blockers in the sports world, the anti-doping agencies actually ban beta blockers, and they test competitors in such sports as bobsledding, curling, archery, sports that use really fine motor skills, just like musicians. They test them for that. And so when I took this survey, 79% of the musicians, professional musicians, said that they thought beta blockers should be able to be used and not banned from our audition process. So I thought that was just an interesting question. And to kind of recap everything we've talked about today, this is a survey of what musicians choose to do. So all the different things we've listed, from meditation, eating, sleeping, getting professional help, beta blockers, books, visualization, breathing. These are different. This is the kind of the chart of what everybody is using, and breathing is the number one thing. So making sure that it's like we talked about the breathing meditation, just kind of learning to use that is actually what most professional musicians use when they're on stage and starting to feel nerves. There's a whole set of topics that we actually won't be delving into today, but I wanted to mention them in case you wanted to explore areas further. And they're kind of ways to use yourself. We talked a lot about the body being one unit, the mind and the mental and the physical coming together. And these are different techniques that exist that you can look into more. But Alexander technique, body mapping, Feldenkrais method. A lot of people find that if they do more yoga or Pilates, that really helps them learn to calm things, to deal with the physical symptoms as well. And another area is applied kinesiology, which is more of the study of the body and how it works together. And to kind of give you a place of where to start, if you're kind of walking away today and you want a few topics of, where should I start? Making sure that you understand, first of all, that the body is connected. Evaluate your practice. We talked about adequate preparation, making sure you look at what's going on in your practice. Is it smart? Are you practicing slow enough? Do you have a routine? Look at yourself, what's going on with your sleep, your food, your exercise, and then read some books. And there's a list of books on my website if you want to look at them. I brought a couple today. There's a great book by Don Green. He wrote a series of books. He's a sports psychologist. He worked at Juilliard. He wrote this book called Performance Success. There's another one out called Audition Success. He also wrote another book called Fight Your Fear and Win, another fantastic book. And then these are all listed on the website, but another one I want to mention is called Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner. So what's included in this book is actually a meditation CD, and it will take you through his version of meditation, which is great. And there's another woman I want to mention too that has a great meditation CD, and she's actually the person that got me into meditation, is Irene Gabrud, and she was my meditation teacher at the Aspen Music Festival in school, and she's just fantastic. So you can also look her up as well. But you can find this list of books again on the website. And then finally, experimenting with different techniques such as going to classes or counseling. If you're in college, you usually can go visit the counseling center and they have people that will talk to you about it. Or you can look up different counselors in your area, maybe on your medical plan, that you can talk to more in depth about it as well. I hope you're able today to walk away with some tips and techniques that will help you in preparing for your concerts and auditions and help you control the mental and physical symptoms that you may experience leading up to the process or in the day of the process. And the goal is to get yourself in the zone, not only quicker, but more consistently. My name is Annie Bosler, and thank you so much.